In 1986, he stood at a podium at the University of California, Berkeley, and said something that the world would never forget.
Greed is all right, by the way. You can be greedy and still feel good about yourself.
The crowd laughed. Some of them cheered.
A year later, those words were immortalized in one of the most famous speeches in Hollywood history. Gordon Gekko, standing before a room full of shareholders in the film Wall Street, looking into the camera and declaring, "Greed, for lack of a better word, is good."
The man who inspired that speech was not a fictional character. He was real. His name was Ivan Boesky. And by the time he gave that speech at Berkeley, he was already secretly cooperating with federal investigators, wearing a wire, recording his conversations with the most powerful people on Wall Street, because the entire fortune he had built was founded on a crime. This is the story of Ivan Boesky, the king of insider trading, the man who turned secrets into hundreds of millions of dollars, and then sold out everyone he knew to save himself. Ivan Frederick Boesky was born on March 6, 1937 in Detroit, Michigan. His father was a Russian immigrant who had built a modest success running a chain of restaurants in the Detroit area. There was some money, but there was no dynasty, no Wall Street pedigree, no family connections to the world Boesky would eventually conquer. He attended college without graduating, eventually earning a law degree from the Detroit School of Law in 1964. He worked briefly as a law clerk and accountant before making his way to New York City in 1966, where he took a job as a securities analyst. He was not an easy man to work with. He was obsessive. He slept only a few hours a night. He was said to work 18 and 20-hour days, constantly consuming information, constantly hunting for an edge. Colleagues described him as relentless in a way that made ordinary ambition look casual. In 1975, with $700,000 in startup capital from his wife's family, Seema Silberstein, the daughter of a prominent real estate developer, Boesky launched his own firm, Ivan F. Boesky and Company. His specialty was risk arbitrage, and it is worth understanding exactly what that means, because it is the key to everything that follows. When one company announces it intends to acquire another company, the stock of the target company typically jumps, but not all the way to the announced acquisition price. There is always a gap. The market isn't certain the deal will actually close. Maybe regulators will block it. Maybe the acquiring company will back out. Maybe a rival bidder will emerge and complicate everything. Risk arbitrageurs bet on whether deals will close. They buy shares in the target company at the current price and hope to profit when the deal closes and the shares are bought out at the higher acquisition price. If the deal falls apart, they lose. It requires deep knowledge of mergers and acquisitions law, regulatory processes, and corporate strategy. It requires judgment about which deals will close and which ones won't. It requires enormous amounts of research and information. Or, it requires one other thing: a phone call before the announcement. That is what Boesky figured out. That is the secret at the heart of his entire fortune. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Boesky had cultivated a network of sources inside the deals he was betting on. Investment bankers who knew which acquisitions were being planned before they were announced publicly. Lawyers who knew which mergers were imminent. Corporate insiders who could tell him, confidentially and illegally, exactly what was about to happen, before the rest of the market found out. He paid for this information, sometimes in cash, sometimes in consulting fees that were really bribes dressed up in paperwork. He had a system for receiving tips, paying sources, and executing trades quickly enough to capitalize on the information before the public announcement made the stock price jump. It was, by any honest description, a criminal enterprise disguised as a hedge fund, and it was spectacularly profitable. By 1986, Ivan Boesky had amassed a personal fortune of more than $200 million. He owned a mansion in Westchester County. He had a staff of servants. He was a major donor to universities and cultural institutions. He was celebrated as one of the most brilliant minds in finance. A man whose extraordinary research capabilities and deal instincts had produced returns that no ordinary investor could match. Ordinary investors, of course, couldn't match his returns because ordinary investors didn't have people on the inside feeding them non-public information. His trades in companies like Nabisco, Gulf Oil, Chevron, and Carnation showed uncanny timing that, in retrospect, was not uncanny at all. It was criminal. By the mid-1980s, the Securities and Exchange Commission had begun to notice patterns that didn't add up. In merger arbitrage, some amount of prescience is expected. Good analysts do anticipate deals. But Boesky's timing was too consistent, too precise. too profitable across too many different deals in too many different industries. In 1985, the SEC began an investigation into insider trading activity around a series of major corporate takeovers. The threads they pulled led them, step by step, to a network of investment bankers, lawyers, and traders who had been sharing non-public information with each other, and with Boesky. The breakthrough came through a banker at Drexel Burnham Lambert named Dennis Levine, a mid-level banker who had been feeding merger tips to Boesky and others for years in exchange for cash payments. Levine was caught, and he cooperated with investigators immediately. Levine's cooperation pointed directly at Boesky. And in the summer of 1986, federal investigators confronted Boesky with evidence he could not explain away. Boesky made a decision that would shape the rest of the investigation. He cooperated, immediately, extensively, and ruthlessly. In exchange for his cooperation, Boesky agreed to do something remarkable. He agreed to go back to work, wearing a wire. He met with his contacts on Wall Street. He made phone calls. He had lunch meetings and cocktail conversations and strategy sessions. And the entire time, federal investigators were recording every word. The information he provided and the recordings he made broke open the largest insider trading investigation in the history of American securities law. His cooperation implicated dozens of Wall Street figures. It led directly to the investigation and eventual prosecution of Michael Milken, the junk bond king at Drexel Burnham Lambert, who would later plead guilty to 6 counts of securities violations and pay a $600 million fine of his own. In November 1986, Boesky pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to violate federal securities laws. The terms of the deal were severe. He was fined $100 million. At the time, the largest insider trading penalty in American history. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison. He was permanently banned from working in the securities industry, and the SEC also required him to. And this detail is extraordinary. Disgorged trading profits before making his guilty plea public. Investigators allowed Boesky to quietly liquidate large portions of his portfolio before announcing the charges, so that his losses from disgorging the proceeds would not be borne entirely by whoever bought his shares. The arrangement was controversial and has been criticized ever since as a sweetheart deal that allowed Boesky to exit his positions at favorable prices before the market knew he was in trouble. Ivan Boesky surrendered to federal prison in March 1988. He served approximately 20 months at the federal prison camp in Lompoc, California, the same minimum security facility that would later house other white-collar criminals, before being released. After his release from prison, Boesky largely disappeared from public life. His marriage to Seema Silberstein ended in divorce in 1991. He had no path back to Wall Street. He had no reputation left to rehabilitate. He moved quietly, lived under the radar, and gradually faded from the headlines that had once celebrated him as a financial genius. In his later years, he turned to religion, studying at the Jewish Theological Seminary. By most accounts, he lived modestly. Not because the money was gone. Portions of his fortune survived after fines and settlements, but because there was nowhere left for him to go. Ivan Boesky died on May 20th, 2024 in San Diego, California. He was 87 years old. Here's why the Boesky story matters beyond the numbers. When Ivan Boesky built his fortune on insider trading in the late 1970s and 1980s, the laws against insider trading existed, but they were rarely enforced. The culture of Wall Street treated the exchange of non-public information as a normal part of doing business. Tips were currency. Access was power. The idea that a federal prosecutor would actually come after you for trading on a merger tip was, in most corners of the financial industry, considered a theoretical risk at best. Boesky changed that. Not because he was caught, but because of what happened after he was caught. The investigation he triggered and the cooperation he provided remade the enforcement landscape of American securities law. The prosecution of Michael Milken and the collapse of Drexel Burnham Lambert sent a message that the federal government had not previously sent with any real force. That insider trading was a crime, that it would be prosecuted, and that no fortune and no reputation would protect you when the evidence was there. That message has not always been perfectly enforced in the decades since. The financial industry has found new ways to blur the line between research and inside information. Insider trading cases remain among the hardest to prosecute. The culture of access and advantage has never fully gone away. But the world of Wall Street that existed before Ivan Boesky was caught, in which the trading of non-public information was so casual it barely registered as wrongdoing, that world ended in 1986. And the man who ended it was the same man who built it.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
The ledger is dark, and it always finds a way to balance. I'm your host. This is Dark Ledger. If this story opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because next week, we go even deeper.